Up until recently, Spanish flu has been what some people call a forgotten pandemic. When diseases strike, the consequences can be catastrophic. Oh. Throughout human history, some diseases have savaged civilization, sparked widespread panic, and left a lasting impact on society. And in most cases, they take too many lives within a short period. The COVID-19 pandemic is now the deadliest in American history. In the days out and days, COVID-19 has now left more than 2 million people dead worldwide, from ancient epidemics to modern-day pandemics. These are the most terrifying diseases in history, starting with a disease that was deadlier than the World War. Spanish flu, influenza. The Spanish flu was thought to have originated from Spain, but the truth is, it most likely originated from the United States. It all started as a mystery, an unidentified virus leaping around the globe, killing several humans in its path. In 1918, hundreds of thousands of American troops prepared to head to Europe for the closing offensives of World War I. While at Fort Riley in Kansas, the overcrowding and unsanitary conditions created a fertile breeding ground for a deadly virus. Within 1 week, 522 men had been admitted to the camp hospital. Not long after, there were reports of similar outbreaks in Virginia, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, and California. Initially, it seemed like the virus only attacked military men, so it was largely associated with the bloody battles of World War I. 2 months after the outbreak, the disease began to subside in the US, but the ordeal was by no means over. Soldiers at Fort Riley, having taken back their strength and ready for war, proceeded to France, and once they landed, the virus exploded, touching the Allied forces and the Ops with equal force. While the Americans fell ill and called their disease a 3-day fever or purple death, the French caught their share of the sickness they named purulent bronchitis. The Italians suffered from a fever they called sand-fly fever, as the German hospitals were filled with victims of Blitzkatar or Flanders fever. Soon it became clear that the same virus had hit at different locations, and a general name was soon accepted for it. At the time, children jumped rope to a song that carried words that would later be the name of a microscopic killer that almost put the human race to extinction. The last line, influenza, was a metaphor used to describe the transmissibility of the virus that took the lives of more people than World War I and II, the Korean War and the Vietnam War combined. Influenza started like any other influenza case, with a sore throat, chills, and fever. But suddenly, it came with a deadly twist, ravaging its victims' lungs. In some cases, victims succumbed to total respiratory failure within hours of infection, resulting in deaths as quick as the speed of light. According to autopsies, victims had hard red lungs drenched in so much fluid that could literally drown the victims. The easiest way to know that a patient's influenza had become critical was when they presented mahogany spots over their cheekbones. Soon after, these patients turned a bluish-black hue, indicative of cyanosis, or lack of oxygen. When triaging scores of new patients, nurses often looked at the patient's feet first. Those with black feet were considered beyond help and were counted off to die. The way this disease killed its victims wasn't the only mystery it presented. More mysteriously, it attacked healthy and strong adults like the soldiers, which is not typical of the normal flu that attacks people with compromised immune systems. While some places only lost most of their adult population, the flu completely wiped out some villages in the United States. Overwhelmed with bodies, many cities soon ran out of coffins, and some had to convert streetcars into hearses to keep up with demand. Another mystery of influenza was that the virus changes constantly. The mutation makes it difficult for the body to recognize the virus, and so the body becomes defenseless until it becomes totally strangulated by the virus. To counter this virus, pharmaceutical companies sprang into action and worked around the clock to come up with a vaccine, but they were too late. Over time, those who had the virus developed immunity to it, and life returned to normal by the early 1920s. Although descendants of the influenza virus remain today, it's safe to say the worst type of it left the world for good. But this next disease has caused human deaths for thousands of years and still counting. Tuberculosis. This disease's history can be traced to about 9,000 years ago, but its scientific discovery only happened in 1882. And since then, it has killed over 1 billion people globally. There are at least 7 types of tuberculosis, and all are really dangerous to human health. However, the most common type is the pulmonary tuberculosis, caused by a bacteria called Mycobacterium tuberculosis. What this bacterium does is cause holes in the lung tissues, which, as you must have processed, will result in further respiratory complications. What makes TB more terrifying is that it is not only dangerous for the carrier, but also for the community. This is because it spreads through airborne droplet particles. These droplets can stay in the air for hours, causing a high risk of infection for those who are around someone with TB. Once a person gets infected, lesions in the lungs and other affected parts set in before symptoms appear. These symptoms are characterized by cough, low-grade fever in the late afternoon, loss of appetite, weight loss, extreme tiredness, bloody sputum, and night sweats. To make things worse, it took too many years to discover treatments for tuberculosis. Back when the disease was just discovered, treatment was limited to warmth, rest, and good food. And as if that was not ignorant enough, humans in the Middle Ages depended on the royal touch. People lined up to the royal touch of English and French kings and queens, hoping a touch from the sovereign would cure them of tuberculosis. In the early 1800s, the treatment changed to the usage of cod liver oil, vinegar massages, and inhaling hemlock or turpentine. It continued for over a century, and there was no breakthrough until 1943. That year, Selman Waxman, Elizabeth Goody, and Albert Schatz developed streptomycin. This antibiotic was the breakthrough in the treatment of tuberculosis, earning Waxman the 1952 Nobel Prize for Physiology and Medicine. Today, 4 drugs are used to treat TB, but statistics show that the disease is still around, with over 2 billion people latently infected and over 10 million people with confirmed cases. And as mentioned earlier, over 1 billion people have died from the disease. While the mortality rate of tuberculosis is scary, nothing will prepare you for the symptoms of the next terrifying disease, sleeping sickness. Just as the name implies, it is a sleeping sickness literally, but the truth is not in the way you imagine. Not to be confused with the sleeping sickness known as African trypanosomiasis, transmitted by tsetse fly bites, this disease is an unusual form of encephalitis known as encephalitis lethargica. It got the name sleeping sickness or sleepy sickness from its 1917 definitions by Konstantin von Economo, a neurologist who described the classic symptoms of speechlessness and loss of motion that the condition causes. You see, what makes the condition really terrifying is that it can cause brain damage that can sometimes leave patients in a statue-like state. That's not all. It affects the brain in such a crazy way that some were reported to hallucinate, and in rare cases, some became kleptomaniacs. Encephalitis lethargica broke out between 1915 and 1925, around the same time as the Spanish flu. It is not clear what exactly causes the condition, and according to research, it might have occurred as a result of an immune reaction to streptococcal infection. Also, studies have shown the condition may be autoimmune in origin. That is, the body's natural defense mechanisms might have turned on itself and attacked the brain. As for treatment, patients may have benefited from the use of corticosteroids in the initial stages, and they might have also been treated in a similar way as a person suffering from Parkinson's disease. This is because the two diseases share similar symptoms. There is a lot of information on this disease, except for the information on how it came to be and how it ended. It started suddenly and also went away the same way, but it didn't leave until it claimed about 500,000 lives. Undoubtedly, sleeping sickness is terrifying, but at least it wasn't contagious, like this next disease that forces its victims into being ostracized outcasts. Leprosy. Most likely, you have never seen a leper, and that's because of how terrifying the condition can be. For centuries, leprosy was considered a highly contagious and dangerous disease that only struck those who were cursed. Even the Bible referred to leprosy as a punishment for sin and a divine curse because it was chronic and incurable at the time. To most people today, the term leper is used to mean an outcast, which is offensive to hundreds of thousands of people affected by the disease today. Thanks to research, the medical community now knows that leprosy, also known as Hansen's disease, is a chronic and progressive infectious disease caused by a slow-to-grow bacterium called Mycobacterium leprae. This bacterium invades the skin, eyes, nasal lining, and peripheral nerves and deforms the body. Although leprosy is contagious, it is not completely as transmissible as was thought in ancient times, which means that isolating those infected is never warranted. One of the reasons leprosy is one of the most terrifying diseases is that there are usually no immediate leprosy symptoms to indicate that a person has been infected by the bacterium. Instead, it takes a year or more to develop symptoms. It's a horrible feeling for victims as their skin gets badly affected in the form of rashes, lesions, and bumps. They also feel numbness on skin spots, hands, and feet. The symptoms sometimes vary depending on how far the disease has progressed. In some cases, leprosy has been found to cause blindness due to untimely treatment. Usually, leprosy is treated with multi-drug therapy, which involves a combination of antibiotics. However, after treatment, patients may still experience sensory loss, which can lead to different complications. If you thought leprosy was scary, wait till you see the disease that eats the flesh, literally. Flesh-eating bacteria. This disease, also known as necrotizing fasciitis, is a rare skin and tissue infection, which can be life-threatening. These infections affect the skin, muscles, and soft tissue and cause patches of tissue to die. It spreads quickly and aggressively in an infected person, but rarely occurs in children. Every year, between 700 and 1,150 cases are diagnosed in the United States, and up to 1 in 5 cases of necrotizing fasciitis result in death. Within 24 hours of infection, the early symptoms of an infection with flesh-eating bacteria appear. Symptoms are similar to those of other conditions like the flu or a less serious skin infection, and these symptoms include serious pain, inflammation, fever, and nausea. So far, flesh-eating bacteria have not killed as much as diseases on this list, but its impact on human health